Scientology could be called, well, you could call it a religion of religions.
Howdy everybody, and welcome to the Indie Scientology podcast. I'm your host Andy Nolch, the Space Cowboy, and these are closed-door secret briefings about vital information about Scientology and the world, stuff that you need to know. And today's briefing is brought to you from lockdown Melbourne and pretty much lockdown Australia, because I would say that maybe, well, like half the country is locked down. And we just had our first hot day, so winter's like over, but Melbourne's a bit unusual, so you know we can have like winter weather in summer. So, and when we say winter, you know, it's like not snow or anything. It's like our version of winter, but yeah, it's actually not even that hot here, because there's a sort of stereotype that Australia's hot, and it's not really hot. It's just Australia just doesn't get snow, so it's not cold here. And we don't drink Foster's beer either, in case you're wondering. So usually the stereotypes are wrong or something like that, or I don't know, there's just so many things that when you find out more and more truth, things that you thought that were the case were just wrong. And so when I found out how hot American summers were, I was like, what? We don't get summers as hot as America gets. Our summers are more like California. But like in middle America and stuff like that, in Texas and that, you guys get hot summers. Like, you need air conditioners. Like, you need them. In Melbourne, you could get away with not having an air conditioner, you know, and you can get away with not having a fan. That's how good our summers are. And because I work outdoors, it's really quite good for outdoor work, because it's really cruisy. But I'm getting off topic. So today's briefing is part 2 of my additional barriers to studying in briefing. So I'm going to continue, and because I made a whole list of all these points that are actually extra barriers to study that Hubbard doesn't mention in his study tech. So I'm just going to do one more part on this study tech one. I've got like 10 pages here of additional barriers to study, because there's a lot of them, but I'm only going to read one more briefing's worth, because I've got to move on and do other things. And I'm sure that you can work out what the additional barriers to study are while you're studying. You can notice you'll hit things and you'll go, oh, that's another one. So it's not just misunderstood words, there's a lot to it. And the last briefing, the part 1, one of the big ones that I mentioned was a barrier to study was doublespeak. And I think that's very interesting. And then just a lie. A lie is also a barrier, because while you're studying it, you get hit by it and you're like, huh? And you know it's not true, and yet the document's making it out to be true, and you can get confused, and that can stop you from studying. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, if you want to listen to the part 1, where I go over a bit of an introduction to study tech, I'm not going to do that in this one. I'll probably just mention COVID at the start, because actually this is one of the ways that I can get away with mentioning COVID, because I think if you make a video titled something to do with COVID and it's just all about COVID, then when you're speaking the truth about it, it just gets deleted. But when I notice that when I do Scientology, and that's the main thing, but then I add in extra information, I cannot get into trouble. So anyway, I kind of do that now. So Melbourne's like the world's most locked down city, and 2020 they hit us hard. Many months of the year we were locked down, and it was just crazy. And now they've managed to top themselves in 2021. They've done even more in 2021, which is kind of freaky because it's like, wow. So we had a few short lockdowns, and then now they've hit us with a big one, which is what I was worried about, because I knew that they were going to do a lockdown that would force us to get the jab. Like put us into lockdown and say that the lockdown's not going to come out until everyone's vaccinated, because if we lift this lockdown, everyone's going to die from COVID, which of course isn't the case. It's a huge scam. So we went into this lockdown probably over a month ago, and I was thinking, oh, is this going to be one of these short lockdowns, or is this going to be the final one? And a little bit earlier than that, they put Sydney into a lockdown that looked like it was going to be a big one. And I kind of thought they wouldn't do Melbourne and Sydney at the same time. I kind of thought, you know what, maybe they'll just do a short one now, and then October, November, as Sydney's coming out of their one, then they'll put us into a major lockdown. But I did sort of think, like over a month ago, I did sort of think, oh, this might be the last one. It was definitely the last one or the second last one. But no, this is the one. So they just, as time went on, the cases increased, and they just added another 2 more weeks, and another 2 more weeks, and then now, just the other day, they pretty much hit us with, it's going to be 2 more months of lockdown, at least. So that's locked in 2 more months. But then when we get to 80% vaccinated or something like that, then we can start lifting restrictions. But it was almost like we might not even come out of lockdown when we get 80% vaccinated. So it'll be like, it was just really bad news, and it was like worst case scenario, because it was like, it meant that this is going to be the final huge lockdown, and it's never going to get lifted for people who aren't going to take the vaccine, for people like me. So that's it for me and freedom in Melbourne. It's over, and they're doing a very similar thing in Sydney, and I imagine each city in Australia they'll eventually hit, because when they were just hitting Melbourne so hard last year, I really had faith that Sydney was more right-wing and better, and I thought maybe they don't have the resources and they can't do both cities at the same time or something like that. Well, somehow they managed to get Sydney in this. Even though the Premier said some things that indicate she's almost like reluctant. So I don't know how they pressure these Premiers to go along with it. But now they've got Sydney in a long one. And of course, Melbourne's one, of course, is more strict than Sydney's one, because we're just always stricter. But actually some areas in Sydney are quite strict, like construction workers have to get the jab. And they're starting to force employers to get the jab and all this sort of stuff. But they've got more things that they can do to ratchet up this lockdown that we're currently in Melbourne, to pressure us to get the vaccine rate higher and higher. So basically we're at a fully vaccinated rate of 34%, fully vaccinated. And they want to get that to 80%. Now, I think they must have done some estimates that made them realise that 20% of the population are just not going to get the jab. So somehow they came up with a figure of 80%. But here's the thing. A lot of people aren't buying this bullshit. And they made a big mistake with the vaccine rollout in Australia. For whatever reason, and I think it was because we obeyed the lockdowns so well, they just thought that we were very obedient citizens. So when they brought out the vaccine, they sent it to like America and England first and stuff. So we got our vaccine 3 months later than you guys. So that's why our vaccine rate is lower. But also, what it enabled Australians to do was to hear about the crazy shit that the vaccine is causing in those countries. So the rumours have filtered into Australia. The conspiracy theories have filtered into Australia. So that now, I think there's a lot of people that aren't going to get the jab. There's heaps. They really should have released it in each country at the exact same time to quickly get as many people jabbed as possible before the rumours get out about the side effects. But this 3 month break, I think they got cocky, they got confident. They were like, oh, these Australians, you know, they're so freaking communist and socialist. We got all our control system in. They followed all the lockdowns. When we released the vaccine in that country, they're all just going to get it. But no, because we're, I guess, a modern country that has internet and all that sort of stuff, the rumours got out all over the internet and everything. Like, for example, Australia has very high rates of internet piracy, you know, like downloading movies and all that sort of stuff, because they release them in America first. And because we're a small country, they just don't release like a hit TV show or something like that until months later. So people that learn how to download it and stuff. So there's a whole, I don't know, there's a whole group of like rebels in Australia, of internet rebels or something. And I'm kind of one of them. But like basically our youth, I think there's a lot of internet rebels. So now, instead of it being a movie being released late, it's the vaccine that's being released late, and it's enabled us to find out, what's going on the internet. So the young generation, the like under 40s, I would say, but no, actually the age group between 20 and 40. Because I think the age group that are at high school, I think they're possibly severely brainwashed. That young adult age group, I don't think we're going to get the jab. And I think that to get to 80% vaccinated is going to take so long, because we're just not going to go along with it. Like, we might have gone along with the lockdowns and stuff like that, even though, I mean, a lot of people break the rules and stuff, but, you know, it's a whole nother thing, you know, injecting your body with these things that you've heard crazy rumors about on the internet. You know what I mean? That's a whole new level. So that basically means that I don't think the government's going to, if they do succeed at it, getting to 80%, it's going to take ages, which means this lockdown is going to be ages. And if they don't succeed, it's going to be ages, because they're going to try all the tricks in their book. They're going to make this part of Melbourne a hot spot, and then to go from this part of Melbourne to that part of Melbourne, you need to have a special pass and then a vaccine, and then they're going to make this industry force the vaccine, and they've got, I'm sure they've got a whole list of little techniques that they can use to try and pressure more and more people to get the jab. Different types of ads. I even saw like a poster up, like in like inner city Melbourne, you get like posters of like rock bands that are like performing or something like that. You know, those grungy sort of inner city posters and stuff. One of them was for like vaccines, and it was just really gay, and it had like all these little corporations and stuff like Channel 7 News and this thing. Like when it showed who was like at the bottom of it in the fine print, when it showed who was, I guess, the sponsor of this poster, and you just see all these corporation things, and you're just like, what the hell? Like, it's just so obvious it's some evil corporation thing. Like, it's just, it's just funny. Anyway, they've got all these different ways they're going to pressure us to get it. And what they've also done as well is that international travel has been heavily restricted throughout COVID. But in the second half of this year, when they started ramping everything up in the second half, there was like a brief period of freedom in the first part of the year. They cut the international travel even more. And so Australians can't come home if they're overseas. They're literally like locked out from coming home. They have to apply for permission and they're not allowed. You can't leave Australia. They've really locked down Australia, New Zealand, and some of those Pacific islands above us, which are secretly controlled by us, like Papua New Guinea and Fiji and stuff like that. They're like severely locked down and you just can't get flights. And Indonesia is half locked down, and I think it's because they're so close to us, we just pervert them. And then as you get more north, they become more free and you can actually fly. But here we're totally locked down. So it's kind of not a good thing, because it's like we're trapped here and we're subjected to abuse from the government while they're trying to force us to get the vaccine. So it is kind of like worst case scenario, this COVID event. But I think with every challenge, you learn from it, you fight it, you know, you come together, you accept the challenge that God's offering. And in the end, I think it will turn out good. And I think this is going to be one big arm wrestle. But I'm very proud at how low the vaccination rates are in Australia. And, you know, like I was saying, we're at 35%. But that was easy to get to, that 35%, because that was all the baby boomer and old people who were severely brainwashed by the media, right? Who have gotten the jab. So that first 35% you could get done fairly quickly, and you're not going to have to pressure them that much. And they did have to even pressure those people. Like my mum and my stepdad were actually hesitant to get it, and I was like, yes, they're starting to be on my side and stuff like that. But then when they hit us with the lockdowns and the increased brainwashing, they just made it fashionable or something, and these brainwashed baby boomers just couldn't stop it, and they just went and got the jab. Because they have no idea that the whole of COVID is a conspiracy, basically. This is absolutely a conspiracy. I know that pretty much is a fact. Like it's literally scripted, planned, and there's a whole other second half of COVID that's coming, which is an economic thing, some sort of switch to a cryptocurrency or something like that, and getting rid of cash. So to get from 35% to 50% or 70% or 80%, it's going to be a lot harder. It's going to be hard. And you know, that's why it's kind of upsetting what happened the other day, because it's like it guaranteed that this is a long one. This is the final lockdown. You know, like the song, The Final Lockdown. No, I think it's The Final Countdown. But yeah, it's pretty, you know, I mean, just the other day I went to get a pizza and they were like, oh, sorry, you can't get a pizza because we're in a curfew. Because after 9 p.m. there's a curfew. And that sent me a little bit PDS, actually, and had an accident literally as I was on the phone to the Domino's. Because it interpolated me and threw me off. It's pretty wild. And there's really bad stories about the vaccine and stuff. Like, I got a friend who's a school tutor, and some of his students have cancelled tutoring appointments because they're messed up from the vaccine. So, you know, this vaccine is, you know, it doesn't seem to hit. Some baby boomers are fine and they don't get any side effects. And maybe a lot of them are fine and don't get side effects, like in the short term, that we know of in the short term. But it does seem to affect younger people more. And it's really brutal what the communists, the new communist world order, these globalists, these socialists that are just obsessed with controlling society and controlling us. They're really doing a number. Like they're doing their great work. This is like everything that they've ever dreamed of, and they're passing all this government control everywhere, and it's epic. But you know, they've trapped me here and other people here, and maybe that's actually worked out to be a good thing, because maybe if travel was open, people might flee to other places and then not be here to fight the fight of freedom. But now they've forced all these people to just be here while we're getting abused, kind of like they've put up like that Iron Curtain or whatever the communists put into Europe. It's like they've done that, but it's just they haven't actually built a wall. They've just made other ways of stopping people from traveling. But now they've forced us to stay and fight them, basically. And you know, we haven't been through a world war or a Great Depression or whatever, but this is our Great Reset, and it's greater than any of those things. This is epic. It's beyond belief what they're doing to us here in Australia. It's just exactly what Alex Jones talks about. Exactly. He's just totally right. They're a bunch of basically disgusting leftist socialists. They're obsessed with communist type ideas, and they want to control the masses, and they come up with fake things or they create things like a pandemic and stuff like that in order to expand their powers. And right now, they're basically not respecting anyone's freedom to do what they want. They're forcing us to wear a mask. They're forcing us to not do this and not do that, and they're forcing people to get the jab. And it's just disgusting, this medical tyranny that they're rolling out. It's brutal, you know, and you see all these businesses closing down, and the streets are getting quieter and quieter, and it's just, it's crazy. You know, it is just wild. We're over a year and a half in. Well, actually, yeah, we're about a year and a half into this pandemic, and they're not giving up on it. They're still running this. They're still running this 9/11 event. It's just like an extreme version of 9/11, a big government designed event in order to control the masses and do all this stuff. But this is just brutal. This is just a never-ending 9/11. It's just huge, yeah, it's actually quite traumatic, the whole thing. I'm sure there's lots of suicides and stuff, and it's just disturbing because it's really in your face. Like just today, I went to a shop that's usually open until 9 p.m, but now it closes at 7 because of COVID. There are other shops that like a shop that I go to that's got good natural stuff and good vitamins and that, and they close at like, they used to stay open on, let's say, like a Thursday or Friday night till like 9 o'clock. Now they just close at like 5:30, and they're not even doing that because the government's forcing them to. They can actually stay open till 8 o'clock at the moment, but they're just closing at 5:30. So you go to the shop and I can't. Oh, that shop's not open. Like you just continually get screwed over. Or you go to order something online and it takes ages to come. People can't get building supplies and the stuff. I mean, compared to 2019, the difference is just incredible. And they're really abusing us. So the SPs that are in power are full-blown on a power trip and just massively abusing us. Like our Premier said that he got angry when some people drank alcohol on the street or something like that and had a little party. And so then he said that you can't take off your mask to drink alcohol. So he's giving this is where I'm saying these sicko judges and stuff, and these sicko lawyers and these lefties and stuff, this is how these sociopaths think. They just say outrageous shit because they like to abuse people and stuff. They're power-hungry freaks. And then he also, the other day when he announced this really bad news that, you know, that this lockdown's like not going to end, what they did is they prepped us for it by saying that the Premier's announcing our path out of lockdown and that we're going to ease restrictions. And just recently there'd been some protests, so I thought, oh, you know, the protests might have had an influence. Maybe they're actually going to start easing some of these restrictions, and we might come out of lockdown or something like that. And so we got our hopes up, and then the next day when the Premier made the announcement, all he said was that he allowed children to play on playgrounds, right? And then he hit us with all the other bad news, right, about this lockdown being a big one, basically. And of course he doesn't use that sort of language. He uses all the bullshit doublespeak that they use. So that's like a form of victim abuse, basically. You know, it's like you got someone in your house and you're torturing them and you're like, hey, guess what, I'm bringing you cake. Yeah, you're going to have cake. And the person's like, yes. And they're like this poor person that's been abused and being victim. And they're like, yes, let's get a cake or whatever. And you walk in the room and you give them like the tiniest piece of cake. And then you also just smash them over the head with like a whip a few times. And you're like, yeah, take that, you bitch. Right? And then you walk out and you trick the person and you're traumatizing and abusing them. That's literally what our Premier just did. It's so sick. So I think that's all I've got to say about the COVID situation. But it's kind of like worst case scenario, but I guess just because I believe in God or whatever, I think worst case can be best case. And when I've been in some tricky situations in the past, I've thought this is worst case scenario, and then it kind of did work out to be maybe best case scenario, and it was like a big blessing. So it's like I'm thankful that thing that I thought was bad had happened in the long run ends up being a good thing. So maybe what they're doing to us right now, as sick and messed up as it is, I'm kind of looking at it on the side of it must be a good thing somehow. You know, you'll end up being all right. And also, by the way, with the announcement that the Premier made, he when he said that children can go on playgrounds now, right, he also added extra rules for the playground. So it was kind of like, it was again like the traumatizing abuse where it's like, yeah, I lifted a rule, but it's like, yeah, you lifted a rule, but then you added in these extra rules. So they have to QR check in at a playground. Parents aren't allowed to eat at the playground. I think no one's allowed to eat at the playground, and no one's allowed to socialise. Parents aren't allowed to come in groups to the playground. Because what was happening was that parents were talking to other parents at the playground, and it was like socialising. And maybe they were eating and stuff. But then so now they've made this rule, you've got a QR code check-in at a playground, and you're you can't just have like two parents or whatever, or like you can't socialize in groups at the playground, right? So it's like just one parent just escorts them like a robot, and the kids just play on the thingo and then they leave. And it's just like, so that's where it's like he releases a rule like, yeah, they can go to the playground, but then it's like in this twisted, perverted way. So it's really sick, I think. And also, just recently, a key figure in the freedom movement here in Melbourne has been arrested, and she's not being released because she's refusing to agree to the bail conditions. And the bail conditions, her name's Monica Smith. The bail conditions would be basically dismantling the group, the Freedom Group, because she helped organise protests, and there's like letter writing stuff that's going on where people are writing letters to pharmacies and schools and politicians, and there's a whole letter writing thing going on. And if you're in Australia, I'd recommend joining the Reignite Democracy Telegram group. But yeah, it's a good group that's successful, that's helping getting action done to try and fight for our freedoms. And so, of course, the police come and just lock her up. So, I mean, there's no democracy, and Parliament's been suspended as well because of COVID or something. So we are literally in a dictatorship, and this is way worse than the Taliban. Like, I'm telling you right now, there's nothing I would want more than the Taliban to come into Australia and just take this whole place over. I hate the politicians, the government. I hate them so much. They're just complete scum, and they're just obsessed with controlling us and pumping leftist crap down our throats. And they've really messed things up big time. And they're just SPs. And so we just got these SPs that are just, they don't have any respect for what the masses want, and they're just totally doing what they want to do. And they've just stolen, well, I don't know if you could call it stolen, but they've destroyed people's businesses. And you know, a business is something you have to build up for years and stuff. And it's the same as, like, you know, painting a really big painting or something. Like, it has value, you know. So let's say you're a bakery, you built up customers over years, and you can sell that bakery to someone else for $50,000 or whatever. That's an actual product. The bakery or whatever business it is, it's an actual product that has value. And if some government official passes something and stuffs it up, and it wrecks the business and it has to go bankrupt, then that's essentially like the government stealing 50 grand from that person. You know, not to mention, you know, 50 grand is probably a good case scenario. I'm sure heaps of businesses have been screwed over far worse because they've had to pay bills, and they've opened up and they've been tricked into thinking that the government was going to stop the lockdowns. Do you know what I mean? Because the government didn't come out from day one of COVID and say, hey, we're planning on doing all this stuff over the next few years. The lockdowns won't stop. We're enslaving you. We're doing all this crap. Then the business owner could go, oh, okay, I'm just going to cut loose now. But by tricking them and saying, oh, we're just going to do one more lockdown, oh, we've got to do it now, just one more week and just another week, it's all screwed them over, and it means that they've been abused, and then at the end of that abuse for a year, their business has gone bankrupt, and now they've lost all this money. And it's just a level of abuse that is just off the charts. Meanwhile, you get some politician who says some comment to some woman or something like that, and they make it into a scandal. And it's like, no, that's not the scandal. What's the scandal is what Dan Andrews is doing, what these politicians are doing. This is absolutely outrageous. Anyway, so I've said enough on that, but sorry, I've been ranting, but I mean, it's just like, I'm tough, you know. I'm here for the excitement of just to see where this is going, and maybe I'm here to fight this and stuff, and that's why I'm here in this time and space, and I'm trapped here. Because I was honestly, when COVID first hit, I was just starting to contact an immigration lawyer, and I was only going to be in Australia for like 5 more months and then leave. Right, but then COVID hit, and it's changed everything. And then I was going to leave earlier this year when there was a window of opportunity where there was some minor international travel that I could have gone out on. But then there was money problem, and then there was a family problem. And then I just ended up saying, oh, I've got to stay till the end of this year. But I didn't think it would be this bad. I underestimated how fast they were pushing this vaccine thing. Like you might need a vaccine to go to a cafe. So I mean, I didn't think that they would go to such an extreme length as that. I mean, I realized the tactic that they're using is they're doing a blitzkrieg, which is just a full-on massive assault as quick as possible, so that it shocks everyone, so everyone's in apathy and sort of shock, and then they just go along with it. So I thought they were going to do a more spread out over 3 years or something like that and achieve each thing. But now I see they're doing a blitzkrieg. So they're just trying to get everything rushed through and get as many people vaccinated as fast as possible. All their stuff just go through boom, boom, boom in this short period of time. So it looks like even when it looks like when I want to go overseas and stuff, I was planning on doing it in January. Like, I don't even know if that's going to happen. So I'm being forced to be here in this fight. But yeah, it is traumatic, especially hearing about the vaccine side effects to kids and stuff. That's really like, it's just disturbing to think how disgusting it is. And yeah, but I guess there's good news in it. The vaccine rate still isn't that high, so we're still in this battle. But shit's absolutely crazy here in Australia, and that's why this briefing is just stupid, because there's just way more important stuff going on. And I'm probably going to stop working as much and stuff so I can focus on the fight, because it's just like, shit's real. The government are full-blown after us now. Like, it's just like, whoa, they're building quarantine prison camps and stuff. Like, this is it. This is like something out of a movie and stuff. This is what conspiracy theorists have been talking about for ages, since like the 90s and stuff. And so if anyone's not in Australia, right, wherever you are, you've really got to watch what's happening here, because they're going to do the same thing where you are, and you've got to get prepped big time. Okay, you've really got to just get ready for them and tell them where to go. All right, so now back to the additional barriers to study briefing. Okay, hold on. Okay, one of the barriers to study is out of context data. And that means you're studying and you're reading something, and someone mentions something that's not quite relevant to this document, and it sort of throws you off a little bit, because you're reading something, I don't know, about tomatoes, and then they hit you with something about a guitar, and it sort of throws you off. But it just doesn't quite flow well. But maybe they remembered something and they had to just add it in, but that's something that can come up. It's a minor thing, but it can sort of throw you off. It can make you pause for a bit, because you're like, what? Data that's not quite relevant? Like, it just sort of throws things off. So another thing is just that the thing that you're studying is written by a crappy teacher. So like, let's say you're studying maths. The teacher doesn't even fully understand maths. And Harvard actually mentions this one, and it's sort of like their crappy interpretation of maths. And you're doing this maths course, and you're hitting barriers, and it's because you're not getting taught by the genius Greek mathematician who invented this stuff like 2,500 years ago. And so you just got this shitty person teaching you, and so it can throw you off. And actually, this one's a pretty big one, really. I mean, when you look at schools and stuff, the majority, like a lot of teachers aren't that good. And if you speak to someone who's like an expert in maths, and then they go and they look back at their education, and they'll tell you, oh yeah, a lot of my maths teachers were actually quite terrible and stuff. And that's why students run into problems. So that's a barrier to study. Because, I guess when you're teaching someone something, it's just like leaving instructions for where the can of soup is in your house to your housemate. And some people are more intelligent and they can write a good instruction. You know, it's under the cupboard, level 2, in the pantry, blah, 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 and they can write it clear and concise. Some people are just not as smart, and so they write an instruction and you're just like, what's this crappy instruction? So it's actually, when it comes to education, it's really important, I think, to have a high IQ person, because it's just, yeah, it makes a big difference when you're learning something, like the person who's teaching you, if they're smart or not. Another one is, hold on. Okay, Hubbard does mention this one, but I'll mention it anyway. And it's, when it comes to a definition of a word, you refuse to believe it. So let's say you've got a skeptical type person who they have a real problem with anything spiritual or psychic, and they're studying something and it mentions the word spiritual and psychic, and they look it up in the dictionary and they just have an aggressive negative emotion towards the meaning of the word spiritual, or let's say reincarnation, because I noticed that some of these negative people who are like skeptical and atheist type, they literally get upset by just the mentioning of reincarnation as an idea. Like, they're like, that's ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. Like, it actually brings anger to them. And it's just like, they're like, it's so ridiculous, who the hell would... Sometimes they do the same with aliens. They get really annoyed. They're like, it's so ridiculous, as if aliens actually exist. It's so illogical. They can't travel here in enough speed of time. And if they could travel here, they would come and they would speak to us. And like, they just have its negative, angry emotion towards that word that they're clearing or whatever, or subject that they're looking up. And they're basically retarded. There's something wrong in their mind and their thinking and stuff. And so that's going to stop their ability to study. And I'll give you a classic example. It's John Atack's a good example, because I just had like a little war with him on YouTube. And one of the things I mentioned was that the government caused 9/11, and he did this classic thing. When he read that, when I made my video debunking him and I mentioned 9/11, he made his video debunking me, and he mentioned how I mentioned 9/11, and he brought it up and he just said, that's ridiculous, and then just moved to the next topic. And so he had this negative emotional reaction to that. And so if that's the way he thinks towards 9/11, right, then he can't study it. So when he hears someone mention it in a movie, when he hears someone mention it on a YouTube video that the government might have caused 9/11, he has this, that's a ridiculous reaction, that, ridiculous, oh, that's stupid, what the hell? And then, like, he never can actually think with the idea. So someone like me, who doesn't have this retarded negative reaction to it, someone might have said years ago the government caused 9/11, and I was probably like, okay, well, I don't know if that's true or not. And then as my researches went on, somehow I investigated it and found it out to be true. But he couldn't do that, because he has this, that's ridiculous. So he would never even look in the direction to think maybe the government caused it. Do you see what I mean? So it's totally wrecked his ability to investigate 9/11. And he also does a similar thing with the vaccine side effects. He just has an instant, that's ridiculous to suggest that vaccines are damaging people. And then he still goes ahead and actually investigates it, right? Because I know he has. I don't even think he's bothered investigating 9/11. He thinks it's so ridiculous. But he has looked into the vaccine thing. But when he's looking into it, he's not being objective. He's being completely biased, and he's looking for evidence to indicate that vaccines are good. And that's all he's looking for. And he ignores the data that vaccines are bad. So he goes and looks up a skeptic, and some famous skeptic wrote something about vaccine conspiracy theories, and he's like, oh yeah, that's ridiculous, and yeah, and that's his idea of an investigation into vaccine side effects. And so because of this negative emotion he has, it makes him unbiased. He can't be objective, which scientists need to be. And when you're studying something, you need to be objective. You can't have your emotion involved in it. You need to just look at the data and decide for yourself, right? So if you're investigating UFOs and you really, really want UFOs to be real, you can't let that mess with your investigation. You just have to look at all the data, be fair, balanced, and judgmental, and decide if it's real or not, right? But these certain people are just retarded, and they can't be objective. And there's a lot of people who are like this, sadly, in universities, and a lot of mainstream, because the mainstream love them because they tend to be skeptical, and they don't want anyone who's exposing the truth, because skeptical people end up always towing the party line. Like, you know, COVID's totally real and you should follow the government rules, and, you know, vaccines aren't bad, and, you know, aliens aren't real, and they end up just going along with whatever the powers that be want everyone to think. They're like patsies, you know, or maybe patsy's not the right word, but they're just these dummies that just get tricked. But they're not, anyway. So for whatever reason, we're here on Earth stuck with people who have this problem of being retarded, and they insist that they're being scientific, and skeptical is maybe the word, like in a good way skeptical, not skeptard, but like good skeptic. But they're not being that. They're just totally just, you know, like I remember having an argument with a guy about UFOs, and he hasn't even investigated it. So why the hell, like he hasn't even spent a lot of time investigating it because he thinks it's just so ridiculous, and he was getting all angry. And it's like, I would never have done that. Like I would probably talk with someone and go, well, I don't think it's real, and I don't think it's real because of blah, blah, blah. But I'll never get to the point where I'll get angry and where I'd actually insist that aliens aren't real. Like insist. Because I hadn't investigated it, right? This is years ago, right? 10 years ago. I wouldn't dare do that in a conversation, because I'll just say, look, I mean, I haven't investigated, I don't know. But these crazy retarded people, they're like, aliens aren't real, it's silly, blah, blah, blah. And then you find out they've barely investigated it. And it's like the deepest, biggest subject where there's data in the Bible about aliens. There's so much data out there, but you just can't see it until you know where the evidence is. And it requires so much investigation. Right, but these people, they're just psychos. There's genuinely something wrong in their brain. And that's why, because of these retarded people, that's why we are in the situation that we are in, because we don't have enough high quality people here on Earth. There's a lot of damaged beings, damaged bodies walking around, and that's what's making our society so crazy. So that's a definite barrier to study. Having it, you know, ridging on the definition of a word. Okay. Well, there's grammar that you don't use, and I kind of might have already mentioned this, but there's a type of speaking, sort of slang and stuff that you're not aware of. So like if you read something like Aleister Crowley, for example, and he was probably into late 1800s poetry and stuff, you try and read something that he's written, and he's from a totally different generation when they spoke in a different way, and he's from England, and he's from an aristocratic background. And so they have their own language. Like I have right now my own language. So it's going to be hard for the, like, let's say the deceased Aleister Crowley, if he was on the other side and is tuning into YouTube, whatever, you know, and he's listening to me, in this day and time, he would struggle to understand it. Do you see what I mean? Because it's just, you know, so that's why that comes up definitely in studying, that you can hit, you know, these different time periods and these different ways that people express things. And this comes across in Hubbard's stuff as well. He has his own way of speaking. I might have mentioned this in the other video, but, You know, I read a book that was written by, like, I think Arthur C. Clarke, you know, and probably written in the 60s, and it's just difficult. It was just difficult because they have a different way of writing and expressing things. Then I read a book by Stephen Kinane about Scientology in Australia, and it was written in like 2017, and I could smash through that so quickly. I could just understand it because it was in everyday speak, and it was just easy to understand and read. But yeah, you just read these sentences, and it made me realize a lot with Hubbard stuff is Hubbard would write like Arthur C. Clarke, and it was just what people did back then, and you'd read a sentence and you're just like, huh, what's he saying? And even if you look the words up, you still can't make sense of it because it was just how they spoke back then, you know? Another thing that you might hit with a barrier to study is that you're just not interested in what you're studying. That's something that can come up. Like, for example, certain people are interested in my videos, but there are other people who are interested in cars and stuff like that. So they're just not interested in what I'm talking about, right? So that's a barrier. If for whatever reason they're going to study my thing, it's going to be a problem for them. And this happens a lot in schools. Kids are made to study stuff that they're just not interested in. Like, for example, kids used to be a lot more freer. Now that communism's come in to Australia, like, kids are being forced to go to school at like age 3 or whatever, like even as younger age as possible because they want to brainwash them as much as possible. And then they're being forced to stay till like they're 18, and then they're making higher education a much more common thing. So the person's being subjected to just all this stuff that they're probably not interested in, and they just have to go along with it. Whereas back in the 60s, they would go to school first at maybe age 6 or something like that, and then some of them might only leave when they're 14 and a half, you know? And they just don't, like, they're not hitting all these things that they're uninterested in. And a classic example would be like some of the blacks in America. Like, they're not into philosophy. They're not into as much, like, because some of them are, but not in general, they're not that into conspiracies, right? So they're not into Scientology. That's why we won't get a lot of them doing Scientology, because it just doesn't interest them. Okay, it's not their thing. And that's why I on my podcast, I didn't racially screen anyone. I just wanted to interview people about Scientology and stuff, and it happened to be heaps of white people because they're into it. You see what I mean? But if the podcast was about basketball, maybe heaps of black people would be interested in it, or like dancing or something like that, because it's what they're into. But guess what happens when they're in the American system? It's sort of become the thing, and this is because of communism taking over America. They've forced this sort of crap. It's just, the abuse they cause is just endless. It used to be when blacks wouldn't be going to school. They wouldn't be doing these things. They were just left to be however they are or whatever. But the communists came in and said, no, everyone's equal, and we're going to make the blacks and whites go to the same school, and we're going to make the blacks study, and we're going to send them to Harvard, and they give these blacks the scholarships to go to Harvard and all this stuff. And they're getting forced into a system that they're not even natively a part of, and they don't even want to be in. So they're sitting there in a class being taught like English or something like that, and they're reading some book. They're just not interested in it. So of course they're going to misbehave, and they're going to cause problems because they just want to go up and dance, you know. They want to go up and bounce basketballs around or do whatever it is that they're doing. They're not interested in this. You know, I was once spoke to this black dude, and he was just like, I asked him some question. It was, I guess, some sort of philosophical question. It was just like, I was just saying, what's the difference between Las Vegas and LA? And he was just like, they're the same. Like, and he looked at me like, why the fuck would you ever ask a stupid question like that? Like, it was like, it was just on a bus, but he was basically like implying, because I know I can read people's minds. He was basically saying like, what the fuck do you care about that? Right? Whereas, you know, you talk to white people about this sort of stuff and they're more interested in that sort of stuff and philosophy, and they're like, yeah, well, Vegas is a bit like that and LA is a bit like that, and it's just, we're more interested in this sort of stuff which Joe Rogan talks about, for example, on his podcast. Blacks aren't that interested in that sort of stuff, and they look at us like we're aliens, like what the hell? And it's because we've got different DNA and different abilities and different interests, right? And it's the same way I probably look at some of the things that they're into and go, what, like some of the music which I think is bad, and it's like, what the hell? We're different. So if you're not interested in what you're studying, because you've just been forced into this system like a robot as a young age and stuff, you're going to run into problems because you're not interested in it. You're just like, what the hell is this crap? You know? So that's going to block your ability to study it. One thing is that a barrier can be that you disagree with the writer's conclusions. So you're reading this stuff, you're studying this stuff, and you just disagree with it. You're like, I don't think that that's what's going on, and I don't think that's what's going on, and it can slow you down because you're going, I disagree with this or whatever, and then you could end up just saying, I'm not going to study this, and you go away. So that could be a barrier to study. So you could have body problems or case problems, whatever you want to call it. But basically, you know, you could be eating the wrong foods. You could be eating foods you're allergic to or your body just doesn't agree with, because we've all got different blood types, and different blood types and different bodies require actually different fuel. So you could have eaten something at lunch and then you're going to go to study after that, and it can cause you problems. You know, you could have bad sleep, just general health problems and stuff. And those things come in while you're studying and make it difficult to study. And you know, you could be feeling crap or something like that, and yeah, that can cause problems. So you got to study well. You got to look after your health, and that's a big one, really, actually, especially in Scientology, because they're probably not getting enough sleep. They're probably having too much caffeine, and that caffeine like hypes you up, but at the same time makes you tired, and it just messes with your mind and stuff. And yeah, that's a big one. Okay, this is an interesting one. Your mind assumes what's next coming in the sentence, but then the writer doesn't write what's next coming, and you get thrown off. And this one, I don't know if, I think this will happen to everyone, but this definitely happens to me. Sometimes I'll be reading a sentence, and I don't know why. Sometimes I like predict what's coming, or I assume something's coming, and then the writer can say something else. Like, let's say they're saying, they're telling a story, and they're saying, you know, they're telling a story of their car accident, and they say it was a cold, wet and dark night. The car was driving along, and I can't be bothered thinking of an example, actually. But there are certain points in a sentence where you just, from everyday life experience and from your knowledge base, you kind of know what's coming next in the sentence. But what if the writer doesn't write down what you were expecting? It throws you off, because then you go, hold on a second, did I read that wrong? And then you read it again, you go blah, 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 and you go, huh? Oh, that's odd. I didn't think that would happen in that situation. I was thinking you meant the other way around. And that actually throws you off. So that's something. So I don't know, I haven't really given you a proper example of that, but you might come across that in a sentence, but I've come across that problem. Now here's another one. Dinky dictionaries affecting study. Because Hubbard said not to use dinky dictionaries, right? That can actually cause problems, right? Because it sort of ended up being dinky dictionaries ended up being small dictionaries, right? Hubbard was basically saying don't use shit dictionaries, right? Because Hubbard was an intellectual. Like he was like, whoa, with IQ and smartness and all that sort of stuff. So a good dictionary for him would be like a big, deep dictionary. But for somebody who's new to Scientology and stuff, and really for the average person, we actually need a really dinky dictionary. We need a really small, concise, basic dictionary, because otherwise we just get hit with all these misunderstood words, and the deep Oxford dictionary is just too deep and big for us, right? So this is where Hubbard's study tech can cause some problems, because, you know, I remember when I was in the church, I had this little dictionary, and it got defined as being like a dinky dictionary, but it was like a Collins concise dictionary, and it was actually fantastic because it gave like some one-word definitions for things and just was really basic and simple, and it's what you want. It can help you study and get through it, because you don't want these complex dictionaries. They're too hard. They're not really for a new student. But you can hit that problem where you're forced to look up these hard and use these hard dictionaries because you've been pushed away from using the dinky dictionary, even though it's not dinky, it's just small. I read a bunch of books last year and I was using just a dinky dictionary, and it probably was better that way because it stopped me from going into all this sort of deepness and just kept me just in the book because it gave me just basic definitions. But yeah, that's something you got to remember. That's a potential barrier you can run into. Just because the dictionary is small doesn't mean it's bad. They're actually, honestly, they're better. They're better, the small ones. You want these really basic definitions for words. Another one here is disinfo. That's a barrier to study because what you're studying could be disinfo, right? And this kind of possibly relates to the doublespeak thing I told you before, but there is a difference between doublespeak and disinfo. So disinfo is when an intelligence agency is trying to cover up data on a specific topic, like aliens, government controlling the weather. They don't want people knowing about those things. So they put out information about those things that's got mistakes, confusions, some true information, just information that just is irrelevant and wastes time. And they package it together and they make like a conspiracy documentary or a book or something like that. But essentially it's disinfo. It's trying to, it's not a piece of info, it's trying to throw you away from information and confuse you so you don't find out about those subjects because the powers that be have deemed us not worthy of finding out about the secret weather control program, for example, which is what's going on worldwide. So if you're going to go study something, you might, or investigate something, you might hit disinfo and it will stop you and confuse you and slow you down. And you don't know that it's disinfo. I've studied so many things now that I've got to the point where I can start spotting disinfo, and that's how I was able to spot the QAnon thing fairly early. And didn't have to spend much, I didn't have to waste much time on it because I could tell it was disinfo fairly early. And there are other things where I go to look into them and I just get hit with disinfo. One of them is a great example, right, is I think it's Scientology and the CIA. And if you try and, I remember trying to Google it when I discovered that the CIA was involved with Scientology. I Googled it and I was like, I wonder what comes up in Google. And I was looking for videos and the same video kept on coming up, right? But with different titles and different sections of the video. it was like YouTube had been flooded with this video, right? And the video piece was basically disinfo because it started talking about some conspiracy stuff and a little bit about Scientology and the CIA, but then they flipped to another subject and just went down a whole different path, and it was all a big distraction. But it was some interesting information, but it was just disinfo. It was trying to make things difficult for the person who was wanting to investigate the connection between Scientology and the CIA, right? It was, and it worked for me because I'd looked it up years ago, right? But I hadn't been able to spot that it was disinfo. All I know is that I just thought, oh, that's an interesting idea. Was the CIA involved with Scientology? And I just ended up watching some videos, and I just didn't get anywhere. And as a subject and an idea, I didn't find out anything more about it. And only just within the past year have I now found out the truth, right? And so their disinfo that they used worked on me, because years earlier, it stopped me from getting anywhere with it by making that same video keep on coming up, and then the video not really having any data. And so that's the whole point of disinfo. It's trying to stop people from finding out about that thing. And that's one of the reasons we know that Scientology was involved with the CIA, is the fact that there's propaganda out there and there are people working to try and cover that up. Now, if it wasn't true, right, why would they do that? You know, like let's say I committed a crime, right, and I stole your car, right, and then you come and you see me, I don't know, covering up my fingerprints and doing all these shifty things in the days after me stealing your car, right? Because I'm hiding the evidence and doing all this stuff, right? Now, if I didn't steal your car, then why would I be doing all that stuff? I wouldn't need to do all that stuff. You know what I mean? And then when you ask me about the car, I wouldn't need to go on some rant trying to convince you that I didn't steal the car. Do you understand? I'll just say, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't steal the car. And that'll be the end of it. You know what I mean? But when the person's like putting in all this effort and they're like, how dare you accuse me of stealing your car? I didn't steal your car. I was here on Tuesday, blah, blah, blah. And then like you see them washing their hands or doing whatever they had to do to hide all the evidence. You look at it and you're like, there's something shifty going on. Why are you doing all these things to try and cover it up? It's because he did it. You know what I mean? So with the CIA and Scientology, why are they manipulating the search engine results? Why are they making a disinformation piece and then repeating it over and over again in different forms so that it just pumps? So when you look at that video, all the same video keeps on coming up, right? So it drowns out the other videos from coming up, right? So you'll notice that you can spot disinfo with the Church of Scientology, and when their little OSA operation does disinfo on Leah Remini or something like that, it's really obvious and it's clear and you can spot it. You can spot they're doing a little operation on that person, trying to make things difficult for them. But when you spot a real intelligence agency and a real government thing doing disinfo, that's a whole new ball game, because they do it at a better quality and it's deeper and it's more effective. And it's cool when you can spot that. When you get to a knowledge base where you can go, hold on a second, this is disinfo crap. And you can spot it, you know. One thing that they use as a tactic is they'll make a video and you won't see the person who's making the video. You'll just hear this voice talking, and they'll show this a screenshot or whatever, you know, footage of the screen on their computer, and you don't actually see the person. So they don't have a channel that says Andy Nolch, and you can actually see Andy Nolch, and he's a real person that you know the location where he lives and stuff. It's like some unusual name with numbers in it, and it's like just a voice, and you just see a screen, and it's just like that's one sign as well on disinfo or something like that. So if you see like a chemtrail video or something like that, and you're seeing those points that I just mentioned, it just doesn't seem real, you know, and you find out that this person, when you know a lot and you can spot that their data is false, you're like, oh my God, yeah, this is disinfo. So I got to the point where I can spot disinfo. So anyway, that's a big barrier to study, disinfo. But it's kind of cool, because I'm sure there's stuff that I'm getting tricked by, but it's, you know, there's all these intelligence agencies, you know, they've got budgets and they're doing stuff. What are they doing? Where is their products? Well, when you get smart, you can spot their products out there in the real world, and they're doing stuff for sure. Okay, so what you might be studying, right? You've been brainwashed the opposite. So let's say you're studying UFOs or whatever. You've been brainwashed for years by the government that this is another example of what I'm saying. If UFOs aren't real and aliens aren't real, then why is there actually government efforts to try and cover up this subject? That's a big key. The same thing with the vaccine side effects. That's how I first found out about vaccines, is that when I didn't even really know what was going on, I saw a piece of propaganda, and I knew it was propaganda because the way they were doing it. It was on ABC, and I was like, whoa, hold on a second. Why did they make this shifty pro-vaccine propaganda piece and not balance and show both sides fairly, and like, whoa, maybe there really is something to this anti-vaccine thing? And because I could spot that it was just a propaganda piece. And so like, why are they going out of their way to try and discredit the anti-vaxxers or something like that? And it made me smell a rat. And then I looked into it further and found, yeah, vaccines are actually bad. So yeah, sorry, I got distracted, but because it just related to what I was earlier speaking about. But yeah, so when it comes to being the brainwash thing, you might be brainwashed that... Oh, this actually relates to John Attack and what I was saying before, but you might be brainwashed that vaccines are good, and you've had years and years of propaganda, so your head's just been pumped with vaccines are good, and all this data about vaccines being good. Then you might go and try and study something or watch some conspiracy video or something about vaccines being bad. You can have problems studying that because your mind's been loaded, front-loaded with vaccines being good, right? So that can mess with you and can stop your ability to study because you've been heavily brainwashed. And I'll give you the example of with the UFOs, and the people have been brainwashed by the education system that you can't, that it's very difficult to travel faster than the speed of light or something like that. And it's a bunch of bullshit. Okay, they've kept the real science about interstellar travel hidden from us. So the kids who go to school and are interested in this subject, they just get the idea in their head that scientifically it's extremely hard. So someone comes along and goes, oh yeah, I just saw a UFO the other day and they came from this star system, and the person will just go, that's completely ridiculous. You can't travel from that star system to here in that amount of time. It's not possible, right? So they're having a problem with that data, and they cannot study it because they're like, whoa, what the hell? Doesn't make sense. It's because they've been subjected to years of brainwashing and false ideas pumped into their mind. Right? So that's where it can be difficult, let's say, telling the truth about COVID, because you're dealing with a person that can be heavily... like let's say one of these baby boomers, they've been just so heavily brainwashed from a kid to follow the mainstream media, and that is truth, what comes out of the mainstream media. So to suggest that there is not a pandemic going on can really confuse the hell out of them. But for someone like a conspiracy theorist, that would go, well, yeah, I mean, most of the stuff in the mainstream media is bullshit anyway. So, okay, let's look into that. Is there a pandemic going on? And then you go and you look into hospitals and you see the hospitals are empty and all this sort of stuff. Now, right now, there might be a pandemic now because all these people have been harmed by the vaccine. But last year in 2020, there was no pandemic, okay? The hospitals were empty, okay? I visited hospitals and doctors and all that sort of stuff. I haven't had stories of people dying. You just hear the occasional story of someone getting COVID, and it could just be like getting the flu, you know. So, you know, it's so shifty. Anyway. Well, you might be studying something that just doesn't make sense, and the person's a bit of a dummy, so that can be a barrier. You might be dumb yourself. That's something you need to factor in as well. So some people are just dumb, and it's just how it is. So they're going to struggle with this data. Like they're just mentally, they're not up for it. Like some people can study economics or conspiracies and they can connect the dots and they can go, oh, I can see it, I understand it and stuff, because it's like some sort of abstract thing and it requires intellect and thought and stuff. Other people just don't have brains that can do that sort of stuff. So they can hear conspiracy talk and never really make sense of it and never spot a conspiracy because they just don't have the ability in them. So that can cause them problems if they're studying something that they just don't have the ability to understand. Okay, some things have secret meanings, like especially if you're studying the occult, secret societies, Freemasonry stuff, maybe Crowley stuff, maybe even some Scientology stuff. Some of this stuff, or a group, or like a cult, or like some neo-Nazis or something like that, they have their own little words or meanings for things that are like secret meanings. So you go to study it and you're not going to, unless you've been initiated into the truth about it, you're not going to know what those things mean. So that's going to be a bit of a problem, that some groups have little secret meanings and stuff. Oh, this is a big one as well, I think. You're not aware of how much... you're not aware that conspiracies are everywhere here on Earth. So conspiracies are just a normal operating basis of how things go on here on Earth. People are just shifty and they do shifty things, and they've worked out that it works to do things and not tell people their true intentions. And we live in a very shifty and conspiratorial world. So if you're unaware of that, when you're watching the mainstream news or reading a book or studying something, you're not thinking, oh, is there something shifty going on here? So, like, you just think everything's legit, you know, not bullshit. So you can get tricked by things and run into problems by things. But if you're aware that conspiracies are like houses are made with bricks, right? And just people on Earth use bricks to make a house. It's just how Earth is, right? It's the same thing with conspiracies. People use conspiracies to get stuff done. It's just there, it's here on Earth. If you're not aware of that, you have a real blind spot when you're studying, and it can cause problems. You know, you got to look for shifty things. And this is what I think, this is how Hubbard thought, and this is how he was able to spot, you know, the problems with vaccines. Even back in the 60s, he was criticizing vaccines and stuff. Like, he was an anti-vaxxer before the anti-vaxxer movement even existed, you know. And I know someone like John Attack would say, or those lefties go, oh, the anti-vaxxer movement started 100 years ago. I'm talking about, like, the legitimate anti-vax movement, which started up, like, maybe around 2005 onwards. Like, there was, because all these kids got damaged by vaccines in the 90s and stuff, and it started coming out. You know, that movement, like, Hubbard was questioning vaccines back in the 60s and stuff before that movement, you know. And I'm sure it's because he constantly looks for conspiracies and shifty things that are going on. And I think people should do that more when they study Scientology. Look for shifty, deep meanings and behind things and stuff. And that's why it can be hard if somebody wants to study Aleister Crowley's stuff, because he has shifty things and confusion and twists in it and stuff, and it's a mind fuck. And I can't even read any of it. I don't know. Like I've tried reading some of it, and I'm just like, I can't make any sense of it. Like it's just like, what the hell is this? It's so different. But there's so much going on. There's so many barriers that you hit while you're studying Crowley's stuff. Like just go on YouTube now and try and look up a Crowley book and listen to it. If you can make sense of it, then it's just like, what the hell? It's because you're hitting possibly every single point in these barriers that I'm saying. You're hitting all these points and you're just like, what? And you can't make any sense of it. So anyway, you've got to be aware of conspiracies when you're looking into things. Long sentences can also be a barrier to study because they're just a bit too hard to swallow, because they're just so long and they might not be worded clearly and stuff, so it can be a bit difficult, but it's probably best to have shorter sentences and more simple ones. Okay, so Hubbard said that, I might have already said this, but Hubbard said that no words mean the same thing, and that's not true. Little means the same as small. They're pretty much the same thing, okay? And while you're studying something, for simplicity purposes, there might be shades of feelings that are different between small and little, like if you're writing poetry or something like that, but it's irrelevant, okay? You know, you're talking to someone and they're looking up little and small, and they shouldn't fuss that there's a big difference between them. They're basically the same thing, okay? So people run into that problem where they're not, because Hubbard's trained them not to, they're not cool with running with the idea that you can have words that mean the exact same thing in English. And in English language is just littered with words that mean the same thing. Okay? So don't, when you're looking up words and stuff, don't think, oh, this word's got to be different. I'm looking up the word small. I know what little is. I thought small was little, but small's got to be its own special meaning. What's the own special meaning of small? It's like, don't be so anal. Don't be so excessive with your study tech. You know what the word means, okay? You know what small means, all right? You know what little means, okay? Hold on a second, I'm just reading something. Okay, so I've got this example. I'm just going to read it out. So, sometimes sentences are not specific enough as to what they mean. Hence, you can get held up thinking about what they actually mean. For example, then he defeated the Moabites. He made the prisoners lie down on the ground and put 2 out of every 3 of them to death. To be clearer, the sentence should have, and then he put 2 out of 3 of them to death. This barrier you could call quickied sentences that confuse the reader. Here's another example. He would get up early and go and stand by the road at the city gate. Whenever someone came there with a dispute that he wanted the king to settle, Absalom would call him over and ask him where he was from. Another I don't know. Okay, I don't fully get this point that I'm trying to say, but I think I get what I'm trying to say in this one, and it's something that I mentioned earlier, is that it's like instructions, you know what I mean? So it's just simple, straightforward instructional sentences that don't have double meanings to confuse a person. Because sometimes you can, in English language, we can have a sentence where it says that the, I should have an example of this, but it would say like, one person can read it and interpret the sentence in one way, another person can read it and interpret the sentence in another way, and no matter how many times you read the sentence, you don't know who's the right interpretation of the sentence. It's worded in a way that it has both meanings as a possibility. Like, you know, like the instructions could be, I don't know, the keys are under the mat, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I really should have an example to show you, but you'll come across this. And this actually comes across in Scientology because Hubbard writes instructions on how to do processes and stuff. And one person will read it and interpret it one way, another person will read it and interpret the other way, and then say to the other person, you're doing it wrong. Another person say, you're doing it wrong. And it's like, well, actually, the instruction's written in a vague, crappy way, and we don't know who's doing it the right way, right? So that's a definite thing that can come up while you're studying something, because you can get hit by this barrier where you read a sentence and you don't quite know which one it's referring to. So I should wrap this up soon, so I'll just read one more, but you can see how there's yeah, you can see how there's a lot more. Let's see, come on. Well, I think, yeah, some of these points I'm repeating myself, so it's not really that I've written that much, actually. They're just different examples of the same idea of a barrier to study. So there isn't that many extra barriers to study. I think if I was going to be really specific, I would probably say there's another 30 barriers to study, or maybe 25, and that's it. And they're actually, you know, like I mentioned, some of these big ones like disinfo and stuff. Knowing about what they're like, if you're studying or reading something that's about cities that you're aware of, like Gold Coast and I don't know, Melbourne or whatever, and Perth, you're aware of those places so you can understand and follow along with it. But if they say like a place that's like Timbuktu and Takabun and you just don't have data about those places, and you can't picture them in your head, you can't connect them to a picture in your head, and it's harder to follow along with what they're talking about. That's why I'm a big fan of world travel and just knowing as much as you can, because then you can understand things. You're like, yeah, Tokyo, yeah, I know, I've been there, you know what I mean? And like all this stuff, you can understand it all. So I want to read one more. There's got to be another good one. Some of these are really long and I can't be bothered reading out all of it. What you're studying could have mistakes. It could be a first draft, and that I think comes up a bit in Hubbard stuff. It's just the first rough copy, so it can be difficult to get it. Okay, this one here is unimaginable or unrealistic descriptions of things. Dan Brown does this a lot. For example, the waiter had a serious look on her face, yet with soft features she seemed casual. Her eyes gave the impression she had experienced pain in her past and wouldn't give in easily, yet that she did give in too often. Her quiet eyes lit up. I mean, what the hell? That's so gay. I mean, really, that is just so gay. It's so much description. This is actually, before I got into all this sort of stuff, I used to always get pissed off with writers and stuff in English and things like that, and I'd sort of mock them in acting because had like this character that would be mocking them, because I noticed that they would do these ridiculous descriptive things and fancy words, and they would be like, the staircase twisted in a marble cacophony of blah, 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 blah. And they just say all this crazy shit. It's just like, man, just tell me it's a windy staircase, or like it's a windy fancy staircase, or it's a windy fancy beautiful staircase. Just a simple description, but they go into all this stuff, and you're reading something and it can just throw you off because you're like, what the hell? Like that example I was reading just then with Dan Brown and this waiter. I mean, he's used so many descriptive words to describe the waiter. It's just like, what the hell? Some funny expressions don't really have meanings, and that can throw people off, and we know it's just a sort of funny expression that means nothing. But if a foreigner's studying that, then they're just like, what the hell is this expression? It's like, yeah, it just doesn't mean anything. Okay, so when you're looking up the definition of something, the definition of something doesn't really answer the question of what it is. So let's say you're looking up the word halo, and a halo is a disc of light around the head of a sacred figure. And that can throw you off because you're like, what the hell is that? A disc of light around the head of a sacred figure? Like, I know what a halo is, but I don't really know what a halo is. Do you see what I mean? Like, it's like those pictures of Jesus they show in the past and stuff. But it's obviously something that's been around in history for a long time, and it possibly has something to do with alien visitation or spirit visitation or something. But it's just a definition. It's not simple, because it's like, what the hell is this thing? So that can throw you off while you're studying. You can have a manic, I call the word a manic soup, and the manic soup, that's a supervisor in Scientology, just comes in too much and interrupts you while you're studying, and it's annoying because they just don't chill out. And they also can be antago, and if they're antago, what are they doing? They're constantly attacking things. So you say a definition of a word, no, that's wrong. You do something, no, that's wrong, because it's just the way antagos think. They always attack things because they're psychotic. That's why you don't want to have low-tone people involved with being a soup. Okay. I think that's about it. So, yeah, I reckon that's actually pretty cool. Honestly, there was probably like, what, 25 actual good barriers, or maybe not even 25. You could probably limit it down to like 15 additional barriers that are good actual barriers that people run into while they're studying that we don't know about. But you should be, I think, aware of, because it's all about studying and knowledge and stuff like that, because you need to know a lot. So it's not just looking up a word in a dictionary. There's all these other things that are going on. So that's it for these briefings on the barriers to study. I'm your host, Andy Ultra Space Cowboy. You've been listening to the Indie Scientology podcast. I've got some more content coming, some more exciting content. So I'll be wrapping up the podcast. Maybe there's only a few more to go. Probably 5 more briefings to go, and then that's it. So remember, what you thought was impossible is possible.